Noughts Crosses is a new drama series on the BBC based off of a book of the same title by British writer Malorie Blackman. Now, if you haven't read any of Blackman's novels, then you may, like me, recognise her better from writing the Doctor Who episode Rosa in Series 11. Noughts Crosses, the TV show, is set in an alternate modern-day Britain, instead named Albion, after it was colonised by Africa, instead named Aprika. Conceptually, a brilliant setup and one that hooked me instantly, though having now watched all 6 episodes of the first season, I've been left a little puzzled and bemused, to put it mildly. In this video, I'm going to be taking a look at the contextualisation and characters of Noughts Crosses, and how for me, the show falls short of the mark. Let's dive in. Welcome to Hakuna MaChatter, the diversity in film and TV discussion channel, helping you to better understand the importance of diversity in film and TV. Have you seen Noughts Crosses? If so, what did you think? Let me know in the comment section, and don't forget to leave this video with a like. So I'm going to talk firstly about the contextualisation of Noughts Crosses and how the concept initially is fantastic. I'm sure we all know the history of the British Empire sailing down to Africa and trading the African people as slaves to the Caribbean, Americas and England, so I'm not going to do a deep dive into that. Instead, I'll pick up with where we find ourselves in the world of Noughts Crosses. As I mentioned before, the continent of Africa has expanded itself across the globe, forming an empire of which Albion is part of that empire. Albion is governed by its own parliament and has the same cabinet setup as we do here in real world Britain. There is a prime minister and she has secretaries within her cabinet for the different sectors of the country. Within this world, black people are known as crosses, and they hold all the positions of power, be it government, media, the police, military, etc, etc. And white people are known as noughts, and they are the poorest of citizens, not seen as equals to the crosses. They hold no positions of power, and through the noughts that we meet, we see that they work as housekeepers, dock workers, waiters, or are criminals, and in some instances seen as terrorists. That's the basic outline of what the world of Noughts Crosses looks like. Pardon the incoming pun, but it is very black and white. You are either a nought or a cross, you are either a middle to upper class citizen or a lower to working class citizen, and this is determined by your race. There is very little grey in the middle of how this world is structured, and that for me is kind of where the cracks begin to show. I mean, it's very obvious as to why this world is structured in a simplistic way. Reversing the history is one step, and if Blackman had stopped there, why not just tell the story of slaves but race swap all the characters? The second more important step was to create this dystopian utopia in which Blackman could create her own rules, and by keeping those rules simplistic, it allows the audience to understand the structure of the world quickly and focus on the story and the characters. However, from the beginning of the first episode, I already had 1,000,000 questions. We are told that the African Empire colonised over 700 years ago. I ask, is Africa a continent? Was it a whole continent that colonised, or was it a single African country? Is the continent of Africa separated into different countries? One of the countries it colonises in Europe is Albion. Is Albion a substitute for the UK or for England? Do Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland exist? We learn that London is still London, and well, that makes sense because London comes from the Roman Londinium, and the show takes place predominantly in London centre and its suburbs. What is the feeling from the other cities and towns? What is the feeling in other countries? Are Noughts Crosses so segregated there as well? We get short comments that Noughts Crosses are more equal in Africa. Why there and not here? Over 700 years of being colonised, you would think that things would be more equal between races, especially in this colonised country that is very affluent. All these questions about how the world is structured sprang out to me immediately, and next to none of them get answered in the 6 episodes. The lack of gap filling and short world building comes at heavy detriment to the overall picture. We, the audience, never really understand as to what Africa brought to Albion outside of the general aesthetic and segregation of races. We see how it looks different. The costumes and set designs are a beautiful standout in this show. We see that a lot of the London landscape is different. The skyscrapers erected are different. Tower Bridge looks different. different. But how is society different, and has Albion benefited? It seems to stop at Crosses are now in power and Noughts are not, but the country would still be set up exactly the same. This power from a distant land sets society up exactly how it was, just the Crosses are in power and have all the wealth, and segregation is more polarised. One interesting aspect I noticed about the world of Noughts and Crosses is that many of the positions of power are held by women. The Prime Minister, the police inspector, the lead judge in the judicial system. A judicial system that is governed by elders as opposed to a judge and a jury. A judicial system, on a side note, that still carries capital punishment. With the small matriarchal type systems, I question as to if this is a reference to Africa having more matriarchal societies than we do in the UK. I don't know this to be a fact at all, but just from a mathematical standpoint, the fact that there are many tribes and many countries in Africa could suggest that they have more matriarchal societies than we do, if only by the one. Of course, it could merely be a decision originally made by black women or by the show's producers, as here in modern day society, women do hold more positions of power. Either way, it does successfully flesh out the world of Noughts and Crosses, differentiating it further. Overall, it definitely feels as if the question of what if was very successfully answered. However, the questions of what was done differently, and if so how, were never asked. And in the end, the show becomes more of a, see, it's not nice, is it? Being on the receiving end. And it's not just here as to where my questions ended. Where do Asian and mixed race people fit into this picture? Now, of course, here in the world of Noughts and Crosses, the African Empire took over 700 years ago, some 500 years before the British Empire invaded India. So for that reason, it kind of makes sense as to why they may have been omitted. There are one or two Asian characters, but as Asian people, and in particular Indian people, were made such a large part of British history, I do question as to where or how they feature. On the other hand, this story is about black and white people, and this first season does focus on the first book of 5, so maybe in a later season we will get to see where Asian people do fit into this reimagined world. As for mixed race people, well, early on in the show we see a sign of a Nought hand interlocking fingers with a cross hand and a red circle with a red line through it, showing that any romantic or sexual contact between Noughts and Crosses is strictly prohibited. Later in the series, we see that if interracial couples want to be together, they can do so in underground bars and hotels. With this in mind, it reminds me very much of apartheid and how interracial couples were illegal, and therefore to be born mixed race was, in the words of comedian Trevor Noah, to be born a crime. So that pretty much sums up the contextualization of Noughts and Crosses. For me to really delve deeper into what I think about mixed race people in this world, I'll need to move into talking about characters. Our two main characters are Callum, a Nought, and Sephi, a Cross. Callum's mum, Meggie, works for Sephi's parents, Jasmine and Kamal. Callum and Sephi grew up around each other, and at the beginning of the series they are reunited at Jasmine's birthday party, having not seen each other for many years. Let's also bear in mind that Callum is working at this party and not there as a guest, for as a Nought, that is his position. Callum and Sephi's relationship plays out akin to that of Romeo and Juliet. They are trying to navigate their relationship around this world where it is illegal to do so. And that's kind of it. At no point does it ever feel like the groundbreaking relationship we're told it should be, emphasised by the fact that when they do visit one of these underground bars to spend the night together, there are already loads of other couples there doing it. And here in the real world, interracial couples have been around for centuries, so from my point of view, and furthermore, once other main characters discover their relationship, they just accept it because, hey yo, it's real love. No one is ever really horrified, and even Callum's brother Jude, who spends most of the show trying to bring down the Cross establishment, feels remorse when he nearly blows up Sephi and her family. We never truly understand the consequences of what it is to be in an interracial couple, and this is probably because at every turn Callum and Sephi appear to get off scot-free. What does make their relationship that little bit interesting is the fact that Sephi's dad Kamal is the Home Secretary and, spoiler alert, later becomes the Prime Minister. Having a daughter who is one half of an interracial couple does, for obvious reasons, look bad. But that's all it does. Kamal at no point ever uses his full power to end their relationship. And this is probably because Kamal does have an illegitimate mixed race son who pops up halfway through the show to find out who his father is. My ears pricked up. Finally, we're going to get that little bit of grey in the middle. Finally, we're going to get some nuance to the show. Will Kamal, upon meeting his son, realise that noughts and crosses can be one and the same? Will he realise that from the ashes of this segregated world, the coming together can spring new life and beauty? Will his son Yaru be the answer to uniting the people and ending the civil unrest? Nah, here's £20,000, mate. Get lost. Another thing that Noughts and Crosses does well is to have good and evil on both sides. Kamal stands firm as evil on the side of the Crosses and is adamant throughout that the segregation should be made stricter. But upon seeing his mixed race son, I had hope that a window would have opened that would begin the coming together of Noughts and Crosses, even if it initially at first was only for Kamal's personal gain, therefore holding to his evil tendencies. The idea of the show is to put white people in the feet of black people, to help them understand exactly what it is to be black in a world dominated by the white establishment. The only issue I had with this is that in the end, it told me to feel sorry for the white guy. All the major parts of oppression against the Noughts felt to me, well, just that. At no point did I sit back and go, "Ah, yeah, that's how it is for black and mixed race people." Namely because the UK has moved on and racism and discrimination are perpetuated differently. It's subtle, systemic, institutional, nuanced. Racism bears its ugly head in smaller microaggressions, through continued behaviour and bullying, through saying that someone only got a job because of diversity, through dating someone as an experiment, through constantly asking someone of a religious faith why they aren't 24/7 publicly denouncing a certain extremist group. There are moments in Noughts and Crosses where the smaller disguised moments of racism and discrimination feature, and it was in those moments where I felt the show was really onto something, but they were just too far and in between, and in the end were overshadowed by the story of Juliet and her dear Romeo. In the end, Noughts and Crosses is just a little bit dated, and heck, that makes sense because the novel did originally come out nearly 20 years ago. Though I still think it is a very important show, at least to give a basic understanding, and therefore is well worth the watch. However, if like me you want for more nuance and you want to truly understand what it is to be black and mixed race in this day and age, then I implore you to watch Dear White People on Netflix. It exhibits all the subtle issues we go through today, as well as a lot of the larger ones, and it's all done through character and emotion. In summary, the concept and premise of Noughts and Crosses are an instant hook. The aesthetic and look of the dystopian utopia are fantastic. However, the distinct lack of nuance and dated approach to racism and discrimination means for me, it falls short of the mark. I hope that if the show continues, it delves deeper into how this world is structured and that the issues dealt with hold more relevance for today's audience. I'm curious, I want to know more, and I want this show to succeed because, well, why wouldn't I? Hakuna MaChatter.